On behalf of the Eastern Charlotte Chamber of Commerce, it gives me great pleasure to welcome and thank you for attending tonight's Meet Your Federal Candidates Night. My name is Mike Corbett, as Lori mentioned, and I am the moderator for the evening. I'm very excited to be here to facilitate what is meant to be a unique experience, to hear from the people who have decided to step forward to put their name on the ballot and say, I want to represent this fine riding in Ottawa. Putting one's name forward like this is not an easy choice. The job of an MP can be a very thankless job at times, with countless hours of dedication, all while facing the reality that it is impossible to please all of the people all of the time. So let's just take a moment to say thank you to these fine people with a round of applause for putting their name forward for us. Thank you. So as mentioned, tonight's event is not a traditional debate. It's more of an opportunity to hear directly from the candidates their thoughts and positions in their own words and not through sound bites or quotes that have been presented to us. The rules will be very simple. We will be kind to one another. We will not attack one another, and we will show respect, giving each candidate the opportunity to speak and to be heard. You're welcome to cheer for your candidates and grumble if need be at the end of their statements, but not during, please. We're to show respect to the candidates and to one another within the crowd. This event will run exactly 2 hours, ending at 9 o'clock sharp, which is merely a coincidence that Monday Night Football between Green Bay Packers and Philadelphia Eagles starts shortly at this time. Merely a coincidence. So here's the format for the evening, a very simple format. We've done it many times. It's very effectual to be able to get the most amount of information out of our fine candidates as we can. So each candidate will be given exactly 5 minutes for an opening statement. We will then have a robust answer and question period with each candidate to be asked the same questions with exactly 2 minutes to answer each question. The order in which it will be going, it was a random draw. John will be starting in the opening, then it will go Susan, then Karen, and when we close, it will go the other way. When we get through our questions, because John went first, Susan will answer the first question. This is simpler than it sounds. Susan will answer the first question, then Karen, then John, and then each person will get a chance to answer first, and each person will get a chance to answer last. It's just the most fair system that we've been able to come up with on this one. So there will be no questions from the floor this evening in this format. The questions that you have provided were done so in writing, and they were prepared in the back. So as the evening goes on, if something comes up and you're like, we're just not hitting on this one issue, perhaps fishing or something that you really you feel strongly about, there'll be somebody in the back of the room, get your question, and it'll be brought up to me here. So we only have so much time for so many questions, but we are going to get through as many of these as fast as we can. That's why we're going to respect the 2-minute rule. So these questions that you put forward have only been altered in length and wording so that the question is not specific to one candidate. That's not the goal for the evening. The goal is to be able to have the same question to be asked for each candidate. So it's, again, a little bit of a different format from what you may have seen on the CBC and one of the larger type, but this is not a debate, this is a get to know your candidate. So you go back anytime that you want to throughout the event, and the questions will come forward. So as I said, each candidate will be given 3 minutes for closing in the end, and that will then wrap up our evening. So as I mentioned, I ask that each candidate shows respect for one another and to the audience by ending your statements once the buzzer has gone off. The buzzer is, you have the buzzer? It's a pretty quick little buzzer. So hopefully if you're running over, a little bit of run over is not a big deal, but if you're really gearing up, then you're going to force me to do the unenjoyable thing of being rude, and we have a rule. Our rule is to be respectful, so you're going to make me unrespectful. We don't want to do that, so make sure you just respect the alarm. So that's enough for me. Let's get to what we came here for. So the candidates are seated in the order in which I've mentioned, so let's just get started. So as we said, John, you get the first kick at the introductory, and don't worry about the clock because it'll be ran right over here. So John, when you're ready, you can stand, sit, jump around, do whatever you want.
Well, thank you, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for coming out tonight to take part in the election, and thank you to the Eastern Charlotte Chamber of Commerce. It's great that you've hosted this event and to bring us together so we could discuss some of the important issues that people will be voting on in just a couple weeks. Elections are important and they matter. The person we represent, we elect to represent us, will be our voice and our only voice in Parliament. And being an elected official is a tough job. It means traveling around this large riding, it means listening, and it means working with people to solve their problems. Problems that to individuals can be complex because the federal government's so large and people sometimes just need a little bit of help breaking that down and finding answers to some of the challenges they're facing in their personal lives. A big job as well, and this is perhaps the one that is very important, I think, is working to address and advance local projects. Now, these projects can be big and small, anything from a rec center like this or a town hall like this to a major highway structure like we have Route 1 behind us this evening. And of course, in a riding that's this large, every community is a little bit different. And every community has its own priorities. And it's incumbent on the Member of Parliament to prioritize those priorities, work with their municipal and provincial partners to try to solve the job and get it done. Because New Brunswick's a small place. We're a small province, but we're a proud people. And if we don't work together, it's easy for our voice to get overlooked in Ottawa. There's 78 seats in Quebec, there's 100 and some in Ontario. In fact, just the Greater Toronto Area has more seats than Atlantic Canada combined. So you can see how, for us, we really have to be at the top of our game in order to get things done. Now, I served as Member of Parliament from 2011 to 2015, and I was able to secure a record level of projects, a record number and a record level. From halls to wharves, to local municipal projects, to upgrades of federal buildings, and even an airport runway on Grand Manan. This is perhaps the most important job, having a big voice, able to work with others, and able to get things done in Ottawa. And of course that means, as I said, working with the municipal and provincial partners. And what's important is that after the election, we put away our colors, we roll up our sleeves, and we get to work. This is a lesson that I think past Member of Parliaments have succeeded in doing, and they've showed us how to do it as well. Because it shouldn't matter if the government in Fredericton is a Liberal government or a Conservative government, we just have to get to work in order to advance New Brunswick's priorities. And so a couple changes we'd like to make if we're elected, if there's a new Conservative government elected. One is to bring back the ACOA minister to Atlantic Canada. The current government did away with that. The ACOA minister today comes from Mississauga, just outside of Toronto, and that's a mistake. We need a local person here in Atlantic Canada to represent us around that table. As well, our plan is to appoint a minister for rural affairs to make sure that as projects come out of the cabinet table and out of the government, they have that rural perspective, and we can be sure that rural Canada is going to be part of the decision-making process in Ottawa. Now, the other job of the Member of Parliament that I think is equally important is to represent the voters in Parliament. Now, that doesn't mean telling everyone what they're going to want to hear, but it means saying what you believe at home and then going Ottawa to Ottawa and voting that way. Not saying one thing at home and voting another way in Ottawa. And if we look at the current government, we have a litany of votes that I think work against the interest of New Brunswick Southwest residents. A carbon tax. We have a values test on the summer job program, which required applicants to sign off on Justin Trudeau's value as a condition to get employment or to get funding. We have a government that seems to continually fight with the Blaine Higgs government as opposed to work together. We have a government that worked against the Energy East pipeline. And we have a government, of course, that brought in Bill C-71, the backdoor gun registry, after promising not to do so in the last election. So if you think it's time to elect someone that will stand up for New Brunswick values, our shared priorities, local values, I hope you'll consider voting for me in the election on October 21st. I'll be your voice, I'll work hard to represent you, and I'll work hard to make sure our interests are heard in Ottawa and we get things done for this great province. Thank you.
Thank you, John. You're okay? Ready to go again? Okay. Susan, you have 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. And also, I would like to thank the Eastern Charlotte Chamber of Commerce for inviting me too. And thank you all you people from the audience who have come in. I was going to say, everyone here seems to know everybody else, except I say I do live in Hanwell. But I did spend a fair bit of time here years and years ago. In my former life, I worked for the Department of Natural Resources, and I spent a lot of time in this area, and I really had a great time. We'd stay in St. Stephen and that sort of thing. But anyway, as you know, I'm the Green Party candidate, and I'm really anxious to meet the people here and get to know everyone. And I've toured around a little bit. I've been to St. Stephen earlier, and I've visited the SPCA. I've built it where I actually got my last dog while I was there. She's really cute. Anyway, I've also been to the Charlotte County Food Bank and met the people there, and it's been a really enlightening experience. The thing I find with Canadians is, in general, and not just the people of Charlotte County and New Brunswick Southwest, is that we're really engaged and caring people, and we really can't be divided. I know that there are different political factions that try and divide people and for their own purposes and different rhetoric, and then we really can't be divided. And if we do, we're going to lose our opportunity. We're kind of at a turning point in the environment, in the economy, and we can't take a chance on losing our opportunities for the economy and for health and for progress in general. Oh dear, sorry. As you can tell, I'm quite new at this. So the Green Party platform, it speaks to our immediate and future needs. The reason I got into doing this, I am on council in Hanwell. I was involved in the getting the LSD put into a rural community because people need a voice. And I've learned that oh dear, terrible. Sorry. That to move forward, we've got to have a strong voice. And I've worked with the different parts of the provincial government. I've been involved more in the federal things, and I'm finding that there's just the normal two political parties we've had have not been. It's been back and forth for many years, and we just need something different. And we're hoping that we just. Oh, sorry. Anyway, let me start again. We really are at a turning point, and politics as usual just isn't going to work. And if we're going to survive, we need a platform that's not as conventional and not full of promises and represents a vision for Canada in 2030. One of the things that impressed me with the Green Party of Europe when I first started looking at this is they plan 25, 30, 40 years down the road, whereas we've been, for as many years as I can remember, it's been a 4-year back and forth, and things have changed just for the sake of changing them. And it's time that we've really got to do something more positive. Whether we like it or not, climate change is happening. And I'm not going to debate why or how or whatever, but we can't put our head in the sand anymore and admit that and hide that it's happening. It just creates more anxiety, more depression, more problems, economic problems, and makes people worried and anxious. So our policies are, everything that has gone through a Green Party policy is based on sound economic principles, but with the eye in mind for the environment. And that is basically why I've put my name forward and why I do believe that the rural parts of New Brunswick, especially Charlotte County, are very vulnerable, and we really need to move forward in an organized and practical manner. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you very much. Ready? Karen, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you all for joining us tonight. It's quite exciting to see the Eastern Chamber here doing this type of event, and also for allowing us to be able to share our answers to the questions that may be burning for you, but also in a way that you're hearing it one-on-one. It's not being interpreted by another source or any kind of misinformation. I'd like to recognize that my husband is here. One of my best supporters is here in the audience with me. My husband and I have lived in this area for over 30 years. And we've lived here full time. We've operated 2 businesses. We've raised 2 children here. My son is a diver. My daughter is a nurse. She's just started her master's. And 4 years ago, I had 2 children, and now we have 2 grandchildren. So when I look at this area and the opportunities for it, it's actually quite personal. And in 2015, when I decided to put my name forward, I mean, for anyone that's here, putting your name forward to run for office is a big decision to make. You've got to take into consideration what you're leaving, what you're going to, and what the risk is. And after over 20 years of being involved with international trade and working with trade agreements and all sorts of different activities like that, but certainly on the education side, what I believed was possible, and I worked really hard on this over the last 4 years, what I believed was possible and really important is that we provide constituents with information. Maybe there may be small nuggets of information, but it's a lot like teaching. Every day you can make a difference. The challenge is getting the right information out, or the correct information out, and when it gets misinterpreted, that you find some other way to realign that. I think that when you're representing an area, especially as large as this one, you have to get out there. And over the last 4 years, I've held over 40 town halls. In Parliament, I wasn't a quiet mouse. I spoke almost 1,400 times on behalf of our riding. And the opposition would often say they could not believe how many times I would mention New Brunswick Southwest. Whether I was in Parliament, whether I was on committee, or traveling to places like Asia, I always talked, for example, about the fisheries and the opportunities there. Having a background in international trade, when I was asked at a Montreal airport, what is it that I would like to do in Parliament? And what I had said to Dominic LeBlanc at the time was, I would like to represent my riding on the Trade Committee. And he said, well, that's an easy one. You have 20 years experience with that. But that's where I wanted to be. And I wasn't looking for a big appointment, and I can tell you why. In my opinion and in my experience, I believe this was true over the 4 years, is that when, especially for a new government with new people in Parliament running for the first time, this is a big riding. It's over 11,000 square kilometers. We've got the islands, so we have the Fundy coastline. We border on Fredericton, we border on Sussex, we border on St. John. To get around that, I had to be in my riding. So I came home every single weekend. And when I came home on the weekends, Andrew and I were in a good spot. Our kids were older. They weren't living at home, so we did the roads. We crisscrossed the riding every weekend. I went to as many events as possible, representing people, but also listening to the people in our federal riding about matters that were important to them and taking that information back. And sometimes you don't hear in the news, or very rarely do you hear in the news, when there's a piece of legislation, the work that went into that behind the scenes to get that piece of legislation forward. And I can say I had a strong reputation in Ottawa as, I wonder what Ludwig's going to say about this. Or has anyone asked Ludwig about it? Or if a vote's coming up, there were times when the whip's office they were at me 2 weeks beforehand. How do you feel about this piece? Or when I could see a piece of pending legislation, such as C-71, I worked very, very closely with the minister on that piece of legislation. So when it finally came out, it was not how it first started. There were pieces of legislation that would not fit and would not be relevant or reflective in a rural riding and a coastal riding. So I always kept that lens in mind. I took as many opportunities as I could to join caucuses, and from the very beginning, I was appointed by my New Brunswick colleagues to chair the New Brunswick caucus. So I can tell you that when we talk tonight, I'm sure there'll be questions about Energy East. At the last 2.5 years, when it came to anyone wanting to lobby the New Brunswick caucus, they had to come through my office. So I know the lobbyists that came through, I knew the questions that were being asked, the requests that we had. Are we almost at time? Oh, and we'll get back to that in a minute. Thank you.
What a great way to open. Thank you very much. So now, my favorite part of the evening, this is where we're going to get to the questions that you put forward. So we have a good pile of questions, but there's never enough. So if something comes up throughout this, just go to the back. Somebody will be back there. Okay, We're ready for question 1. So as I said, the way that it opened, it went John, Susan, Karen. It will close with Karen, Susan, John. So Susan will go first on the very first question, and it's a great one. Did I mess that up already?
No, they're fine.
Okay. Nice. Okay, so Susan, you're up on first, and then everybody will get the exact same question. So it's a long one, but we're going to surmise it as I repeat it each time. So there's a good chance that there will be a minority government after the election. How will you be able to work with other parties to get things done? So the question is, Susan, for you, if you were an NP, please give an example of how you would work with other parties in a minority government situation.
Actually, I'm really in favor of minority situations. I think probably because I come from the land of municipal politics where there are no parties and everyone has to work together and has to make their point known and be determined and look out for the people that are in your riding. I know, for example, when you become a municipal councillor, the first thing you do is you take an oath not to just look after I'm the councillor for Ward 1, for example. I took an oath to look after everyone in Hanwell, and I would do the same as a member of Parliament. And I think it provides a great opportunity when it's a minority government for more discussion, for more people have to get along and they have to compromise. And I think if you're there and you're organized and you're I don't want to say forceful, but determined, then I think that you can get a lot more done in a minority government than you can in a majority.
Susan. Karen, same question to you. If you were the MP, please give an example of how you would work with other parties in a minority government.
Thanks, Mike. I can actually give you examples of how I did work across the aisle. So I do have that experience. I can give you 3. So when we look at Team Canada, sitting on the International Trade Committee, I was also on the vice chair of the Canada-US Interparliamentary Group. So when we traveled as Team Canada. And when I was in Washington, often it was with the opposition. So we would travel with the Conservatives, we'd travel with the NDP, and we would work together in the best interests of Canada. When it came to 2015, I really felt strongly about Lyme disease. I heard at a number of doors that it was a concern. So I promised when I went to Ottawa that I would focus on informing people and working on the prevention of Lyme disease. And then with that, I organized some roundtables. And I invited Elizabeth May to co-chair with me. I also opened it up as an all-party, so we had everyone that was interested in Parliament because health knows no partisanship. Lyme disease does not stop at the color of red, green, or blue. So we worked together that way. There were a number of private members' motions as well that I voted for that were from the opposition. Larry Bagdell had put forward a private member's motion on the definition of a variant gun. I voted with Larry, and I was the only one that voted with Larry. Rona Ambrose worked on a private member's bill regarding mandatory training for judges in Canada. I voted with that. I also worked on that piece of legislation on the Status of Women Committee. Peter Van Lowen had put forward a heritage tax credit. I voted for Peter's motion. And I think that's what really matters. At the end of the day, when we're in Parliament, we're representing all Canadians. And we have to stop with the partisanship and stop thinking about the re-election in 4 years' time. I ran to make a difference, and I believe working across the aisle is absolutely essential, regardless if it's majority or minority. Thank you.
Thank you. So John, same question. If you were the MP, please give us an example of how you would work with a minority government situation.
Sure. So I think minorities can work exceptionally well for Canadians, and in some ways they keep the elected officials honest because we're forced to compromise every single day with members of the opposing parties. And we see, for example, it's working well here in New Brunswick, where despite the Higgs government having a minority of seats, they're governing exceptionally well, having to work with different parties on different issues in order to get things done for New Brunswick. They've kept taxes low, they've balanced the books, and they're moving ahead on our shared priorities. And the same thing happens in Parliament as well. Of course, we've witnessed minorities before, both under the Conservatives and before that the Liberals. And again, they require people to work together. They bring us together in order to pass bills and to get things done. And this is the strength, I think, of our system. And so whether or not a member of Parliament is elected into a minority Parliament or into a majority Parliament, for all of us, I think, we have to work with the other people that are sent into Parliament. Because believe me, every constituency in this country, every riding in this country has different priorities, and compromise has to happen. We have to sort out priorities and then get things done. I too have a good record voting for opposition motions in bills in the House of Commons. There was one bill that was tabled by the NDP on petitions, forcing a debate if an electronic petition received 500,000 signatures. And for whatever reason, the Conservative whip didn't want this to happen, because these things do kind of mess up the House business day in and day out. And I was one of a handful of Conservative MPs that voted for this bill. And it passed. And the Conservative whip did not expect it to pass. Two of our MPs were actually out of the House, and they shouldn't have been. And it passed by just 2 votes. So these are examples where we take positions, we cast votes, and we find compromise in the House of Commons.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. Question 2. We're going to now deal with gun regulation, is the question that was provided to me. So it will be going Karen, John, Susan. So the question is, starting with you, Karen, what is your policy on gun regulation or control?
Thank you for that question. In terms of gun control in Canada, I don't think there's an easy answer to that. When we look at firearms, the use of firearms, we have 99% of our firearms owners are responsible. We have good legislation. There's no reason why it can't get tougher. And in terms of it getting tougher, it was deeper background checks. I do support that. We look at the shooting that took place in Fredericton, where 4 people were essentially murdered with a long gun. That gentleman had a license. When we look at the fact of deeper mental health background checks, that's really important. Responsible gun owners don't want people with deep mental health problems or long histories of violence to actually have guns. When we look at a ban on handguns, I can tell you that I went directly to the Prime Minister in June and said, I'm not supporting a blanket ban on handguns, because I don't think the issue is that simplistic. It's complex. And so certainly I do support our party's position where the municipalities have the jurisdiction to make that decision on whether or not to ban a handgun.
So John, what is your policy on gun regulation or control?
So I think the Government of Canada had the balance right in the previous Parliament, which required robust licensing and training for individuals, for Canadians that wanted to either use or possess a firearm. It required an RCMP background check, and it required routine surveillance and to reapply every couple of years for that license. And it worked so well, in fact, in the last campaign, the Liberal Party said they would abide by the abolishment of the long gun registry, which was deeply unpopular, which was brought in by a previous Liberal government at a cost we were told it would be $2 million. It eventually ballooned to $2 billion and didn't solve any crimes. The Liberals, of course, were reneged on that deal. They brought back Bill C-71 to the annoyance and irritation of law-abiding gun owners, duck hunters, and sports enthusiasts across the country. Needlessly targets law-abiding Canadians while letting gangs and criminals off the hook. And today we don't even know what the policy of the Government of Canada is. Mr. Trudeau's been in some trouble, and recently he threw rural Canada under the bus. He said if he's elected, he's going to ban different classes of firearms, and eventually there could be a handgun ban as well. If these were so important, why weren't they put in the original bill? It's because rural Canada is being used as a scapegoat here for a political problem and to try to capture votes in central Canada. So our position is to repeal C-71, go back to the system that worked well, and to oppose Mr. Trudeau's plan to demonize rural Canada and to target law-abiding Canadians.
Susan, what is your policy on gun regulation or control?
Well, actually, there's not really a lot that I can add to it because I in theory, I believe the same as everyone else here. I understand that there's a need for strong gun regulation or background checks and regulations, but yet I do come from, I've never hunted in my life, but I do come from a hunting family, and so I have, I like I say, as long as the background checks are done and things are, it needs to be, different areas need to have different, we have different, rural and city, and I understand the problems that the police have in large cities, and I understand gang violence, but I mean, we do need to have a realistic approach to gun regulation. And like I say, I tend to agree with these guys here.
Thank you. Question 3, it will go John, Susan, Karen, and it covers the topic of health care. So, John, with an aging population in New Brunswick, what is your position to make the healthcare system more effective and efficient?
It's a great question. When I last served, health transfers to the provinces went up every single year to record levels. And in fairness to the current government, they've continued to go up. And that has to continue to happen, and it's a priority, it's a pledge that our Conservative Party has made to continue to increase those transfers to the provinces so they can determine how best to spend those tax dollars. In addition, the Conservative Party has announced that we'll invest another $1.5 billion in new medical equipment to clear out some of the backlogs and to bring in new equipment online so it's easier for both doctors and patients to access. But one of the challenges we have as well as a province is that we're an aging province and we don't keep or attract enough young people. And that's part of the solution as well. Now you might think that's a bit odd. Well, how do young people help the healthcare system? Young people move here, they pay taxes, they use the healthcare system less, and as they contribute more tax dollars, it means there's more money into the system. Look at provinces in Western Canada where they have resource development, there are jobs and opportunity, and these provinces, of course, are some of the biggest spenders on healthcare. And it's not because their governments are liberal. In fact, they're often Conservative governments, but they have more money to spend on healthcare because they're creating more jobs, more opportunity, and those and that is funding good quality social programs. So our solution both is about investing dollars, but it's also about creating a stronger economy here in New Brunswick so the provincial government has more money to spend on health care.
Thank you, John. Susan, with an aging population in New Brunswick, what is your position to make the healthcare system more effective and efficient?
Well, I tend to agree with John on a lot of cases. Maybe just the way it's delivered would be a little different. There's no question that the population is aging. We're not gaining, young population, people coming here, and we need to look at not only just the healthcare, but the transportation system, how you're going to get to the hospitals, and so that more people can stay in their homes. To me, the extension of Medicare would include pharmacare and dental care for at least, if it'd be great for everyone, but even if you could start out with low income earners, that would be a fantastic thing. I also believe that there needs to be a lot more communication between municipalities and both levels of government, not just the federal level, but the provincial level. And so that you can find out, and with volunteer organizations, there's a great number of a lot of healthcare is done by volunteers in a roundabout way. And we need to have more support for the volunteers. We need to have more leeway for the communities to spend their money and on things that they find important. Plus, we also need to, the system we have now, for example, in New Brunswick, if you have a heart problem, you go to this hospital. If you have a cancer problem, you go to another hospital. A friend of mine actually from Fredericton just spent 17 trips to St. John for radiation. you need to find other ways of getting your money to different hospitals and new and innovative programs. And all of these, of course, require money, and we need to have larger transfers coming from the federal government to the people who really need it.
Thank you, Susan. So Karen, with an aging population in Brunswick, what is your position to make the healthcare system more effective and efficient?
Thank you for that, Mike. So certainly our government has made historic investments in palliative care and mental health, investments in the provinces. The one change I would make there would be a level of accountability. And that was one thing I would say it was an eye-opener when I was first elected, was that when we're looking at transferring money to the provinces, I think there's an obligation as federal officials when we're looking at tax money to see where that money's actually going and making it accountable. A national dementia strategy, I think, is really important, and we've already started that. But we've also introduced EI for passionate leave. So when people are not, when someone they have a family member who's not well, they can be taken care of for roughly 15 weeks. As Susan mentioned about home renovations, I think are important, and also the inclusion. So we've invested heavily, especially in our riding, in the New Horizons for Seniors grants. They're not big grants, but they mean a lot for getting seniors out and getting them together. And the last one, I would like to continue trying to work with my provincial counterparts on the language requirement for ambulance drivers. I think, I hear that every week from ambulance drivers about the requirement to speak French. Not every person down here speaks French. In fact, we have a small percentage of that. I think that's really important, but if we can keep seniors in their homes and comfortable for as long as possible, the life expectancy is that much greater, and we see in New Brunswick alone, we are at a record time when we have the most aged population in Canada, so there's models that we could develop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you. The next question is definitely a hot topic, something that you're going to see in the newspaper on a regular basis, something on the news. So it'll be great to hear right from their mouths their take on this very hot topic for our area. So starting with you, Susan, Karen, then John, the question involves around marine health. So starting with you, Susan, what is your policy to protect the whale population of the Bay of Fundy?
Well, I get, as with every, not just with whales, with every species, we have to do whatever we can, of course, to make sure that they continue to prosper in the oceans here. I know there have been, all kinds of things that have been happening that, oh dear, on this one, excuse me. We need to work actually with the people in the industries, with the fishing industries and the government to do more cooperation between these groups to make sure that in the areas that are very sensitive, to make sure that, that the people who live in Charlotte County and the people who do the fishing buy into any of the programs that we would like to have. I know there are as many issues that I know it has caused a great deal of interest in the area, and I think that we need to listen to the science and listen to the people and find a sustainable way for everyone, for the fishing people and for the animals too.
Thank you, Susan. Karen, what is your policy to protect the whale population of Bay of Fundy?
I had the opportunity to put forward a private member's motion on the protection and recovery of Canada's endangered whales, including the North Atlantic right whale. And in terms of speaking about nonpartisanship, 100% of MPs in the House of Commons voted for my private member's bill. It was unanimous. Working together, as Susan mentioned, with the industry, absolutely critical. We look at the work that the Grand Manan Fishermen's Association did about 10 years ago. They actually set, they were leaders in this field, in this area. When we had the closing of the critical habitat zone off the coast of Grand Manan, a small area, but a significant area for lobster fishing, this year I managed to work with the Minister of Fisheries and the Grand Manan Fishermen's Association, so they have a pilot project. It's 3 whale sightings, not 1 whale sighting like it was that first year, but it was absolutely critical that we did something and with urgency. The U.S. is talking about restricting our trade if we didn't do what was right with the North Atlantic right whales. And for those of us in this room, intimately involved with that, there are less than 400 North Atlantic right whales left and less than 100 breeding females. We're at a precipice of no return. So I think there's a moral responsibility and a right responsibility, but we also have to ask ourselves, why is this happening? So I think, the more we can continue to invest in research and we develop policies that are evidence-based, based on science, which was not done during the Harper years. We're in a situation right now that we should not be in so many ways. We have to rely on the science, and we have to work together very, very closely with the industry so when they see the sightings, they feel safe to report them and not feel fear of repercussions of their industry closing. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. John, lastly, what is your policy to protect the whale population of the Bay of Fundy?
So this is just a fascinating development, and I think we'll leave here tonight with a kind of a tale of two cities, the best of times and worst of times, because depending on who's talking, this was either a great success or it was a terrible mistake, what happened the last couple of years. Everyone wants to work to protect and save the right whales in the Bay of Fundy, there's no doubt about that. But what happened was an abdication of responsibility, and it showed exactly how government should not operate. Susan, you had it right when you said we have to work with people in the industry. And those are the men and the women that fish these waters. For 12 years before the sighting of that right whale, the Grand Manan Fishermen's Association had a protocol in place. They spotted a whale, they took action, and there hadn't been an incident in 12 years. When along comes the cry to do more to protect the right whale, and one is possibly spotted. We're not even sure if there was a whale spotted. And DFO swoops in with the encouragement of the Liberal government and shuts the fisheries down off part of Grand Manan. In the last week of their fisheries, it'd be like closing retail stores the week before Christmas. It cost Grand Manan $1 million in lost income, and worse, it has turned pretty much every single fisherman in the bay here against this policy. Go down to the dock, ask a fisherman today, if you see a right whale, are you going to report it like they did before? And the answer will be universally no, because they don't trust DFO anymore, because DFO endangered their livelihood. And it's not just on Grand Manan, it's every island out there. I know this because I've talked to the fishermen. They're mad as hell because they had a good system, and along came Ottawa with the encouragement of the Liberals and just pushed all that aside and decided we know best, and we've lost our best allies we have on this issue, the men and women who work the water every single day. So far from a success story, this was a failure. And because there's 32 members of Parliament in Ottawa, all from Atlantic Canada,
Thank you, John.
No one opposed it, and that was a mistake.
Thank you, John. Well, there's bound to be some heated questions. There's no doubt about that. That was well done. Thank you all for respecting one another on that question. So, moving on to another hot topic, especially involving anything to do with the Chamber of Commerce. So, this is something that our membership here today is going to be very interested to hear your take on this one. So, it's going to go Karen, John, Susan, and it pertains with taxes. So, starting with you, Karen, what is your position on personal and small business taxes?
Our government lowered the small business tax for starters, so we're pleased with that one. But we also have to increase opportunities here in New Brunswick. As a member of the Standing Committee for International Trade, I worked on trade agreements, and we are the only G7 country that has a trade agreement with all 7 countries. We need to find ways to get those opportunities here in New Brunswick, and that's one of the reasons why I ran. The background and experience that I have in trade, but also the fact that we've got 5 international border crossings. We have a great relationship with the United States, but we need to find ways to get our products to market, whether it's in the US, it could be here locally, we have a small population, but certainly taxes is only one part of this. We need customers. You need customers if you're operating a business. We know that. I taught business for over 20 years. We own businesses in the riding. We know it. Taxes is one aspect to it, but we need to also be able to increase the number of customers that we have and increase the number of markets. We're doing that, and I think what needs to be done, especially with small businesses, is helping the small business be able to connect to the international opportunities. It's not an easy venture. There's a risk associated when you go outside your borders, but we also have, issues in Canada with interprovincial trade. So I think working together with your chamber, I think that's an important part, and I'll just leave you with this. I co-hosted a lunch with a number of trade experts in St. Stephen with the St. Stephen Chamber, and it was to help the St. Stephen businesses and all those involved with that chamber that I'm also a member of, as well as St. Andrews. It was to get them connected with the resources, to get their products to market and know how to do that with some security and know what's needed. They needed to know their homework, and I'm there to help you with that homework. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. John, what is your position on personal and small business taxes?
Lower. That's my position. Lower. Let's cut taxes. Let's leave more money in the pockets of Canadians. Because over the last 4 years, taxes have gone up. 80% of middle-class families are paying more tax today than they were 4 years ago. We're paying higher CPP taxes. We're paying a carbon tax. It was 3 years ago, 3 years ago, when members of the Trudeau caucus were calling entrepreneurs tax cheats. Some of you remember that. There was a town hall meeting at the Garsland Centre, and I walked in, and the only white-collar professional there was the accountant giving the presentation. The rest were fishermen, the family that owns the cleaning chemical supplies, the pizza owner, the hardwood, the cabinet company. These are all blue-collar workers who work darn hard, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 hours a week. They invest their savings and they work hard. And the members of the federal government were calling them tax cheats. Meanwhile, of course, Ottawa exempted the family fortunes of Justin Trudeau and Bill Morneau from any taxes. I left that meeting and I called my friend Bradley Small, who's head of the Fishermen's Association in Fundy North. I said, Bradley, how many of your members have these agreements, are incorporated? And he figured about 3 out of 4, 75%. I mean, at that point, I knew the changes were dead because the Trudeau government had seriously miscalculated who they were targeting. They weren't targeting fat cats and lobbyists and lawyers. They're going after ordinary Canadians that work hard. And so what are we going to do for small businesses? We're going to repeal Justin Trudeau's tax increase on small business investments. We're going to exempt spouses from Trudeau's tax increase on small business dividends. We're going to reduce federal regulations by 25%. We're going to implement a 2-for-1 rule for new regulations, meaning if you bring in a new regulation, you repeal 2, and many other things that you'll hear about more over the next 3 weeks.
Thank you, John. Susan, what is your position on personal and small business taxes?
Well, I think I tend to agree with everyone that they really need to be lower. But as Karen says, there's more to it than that. We need more opportunities. You need more education for people who want to start up a small business. And we also need to get away from giving corporate money to large companies. We need to turn that all into, or mostly into, giving small business opportunities for small business to have help that way. We also need to have more education for anyone who wants to start a small business. Especially, I notice there's all the younger kids here tonight. I mean, they need to learn how to start a small business, how to work for themselves, and understand, and also make the rules and regulations. When you go you need an accountant. Let me tell you, if you want to do anything, there's so much red tape that it just needs to be clear and easier and straightforward, and just promote the small business as much as we possibly can.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you. I don't think I've ever seen us fly through questions like this. This is awesome. So thank you again. This is great. So the next topic that was presented from the crowd here tonight deals with immigration. So I'm going to go John, Susan, Karen, keeping the rotation going as we are. So John, what is your position on immigration in our riding?
More. We need people. We need young people from both across this country. We need to bring the kids home that have left. We need to keep young people here. but we also need the new and next generation of Canadians that are willing to roll up their sleeves and work hard. We see parts of that. We see some good news stories, like on Deer Island with Pat Jarrell and the Filipino community that's rolling up their sleeves and become an important part of the community here in the broader, what I call the greater St. George area. Just a few months ago, we had a Filipino cultural day here. They brought in a pig roast. I've traveled cities around the world. This was some of the best food I've had. It was wonderful because it was local Filipino cuisine that you just can't find anywhere else except here in the home country, their ancestral homes. And the good news is I've talked to members of this community. Not only are they coming here to work here, they're laying down roots. And that's important, is if people come here to work, there has to be a path to citizenship. So people can join the Canadian family, work hard, and by the family I mean society, and have a good paying job and be rewarded for their efforts, and then over time become Canadian citizens, so they're further part of the community. But I worry about one thing, in that we have to get the fundamentals right as well. Because if we can't keep our young people here, people that are born and bred here, with their strong ties to Atlantic Canada because of high taxes and lack of jobs, we're not going to be able to keep the next generation of new Canadians as well. If someone's traveled from around the world and has landed here from India or Japan or England or wherever, well, the next flight from here to Montreal or Toronto or Vancouver is the easiest one for them, where it's harder for our families because they're already rooted here. So we have to make sure the tax base is fair, the wages are decent and fair, and there's opportunities for them as well as Canadians that are born here as well. So that's my thoughts on that.
Thank you, John. Thank you. So Susan, what is your position on immigration in our riding?
Well, actually, I believe John said it all. Really and truly, I think not only is it's a win-win situation. As he says, we need more people here. We need more people working and paying taxes and enjoying this place. Plus, I also think it's a win for anyone who's lucky enough to come here. You know, we've been here, like I say, some of us for almost 30 years. No, a little longer than that. And we know the quality of life that we have here. And like you say, retention, it's a strange, a lot of people come from, much bigger, more crowded places. We need to get these people here. We need them to understand, our way of life. And then I think that you couldn't help but enjoy it. But I don't think we need to look at it just basically from a tax perspective, that we need more people to pay the taxes and do it. We need to have a good quality of life for the people who come here. And I think it's a great education for all of us who are here to welcome people from all over the world.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Susan. Karen, what is your position on immigration in our riding?
This is probably one of those topics that's quite rare that most of us would likely agree on up here. When we formed government in 2015, one of the things that we pushed for as 32 out of 32 MPs in Atlantic Canada was an immigration pilot project. One of the number one things that we saw was the fact that we need to have larger populations. We didn't have any given day here in Charlotte County, there's 300 job vacancies. Any given day in the province of New Brunswick, there's about 3,000. So after labor market analysis is done, if the person cannot be found locally with that skill set, it needs to be employer focused. So not for the government of Canada or the province of New Brunswick to say where to target, whom to target, and what skill sets to target. I really believe in the Atlantic Immigration Pilot that it really should be employer focused. So Cook Aquaculture, they determine the skill sets that they need and where the employee, so they draw them in. But we also need to have a better process, continually improve on it with how they're integrated. So here in St. George, the Multicultural Center, I would say is top notch. I think Joan's here somewhere, the executive director, is top notch. But it's more than that. It's, pulling people together, also allowing them to bring their family members. One of the things that we found statistically is the more likely someone is to stay, it's based on if they have a spouse that can come in and maybe work, if they bring in their children. If they bring their children in, they're more likely to pick up roots and put their child in school, so no kid wants to move after a while, but also maybe even the grandparents. One of the challenges that we're facing now with our policy is we've now had about our population in Atlantic Canada increase by around 9,000, But there's challenges, the bureaucratic challenges. So it could be access to Medicare. The issue with the paperwork, someone's filled in the wrong form, but also the challenge between federal and provincial governments. We really do need to work that closer together. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Part of what we're doing here tonight is getting to know them on an individual level, not just at a party level. So I'm going to actually read this question in its entirety, but we'll then surmise it for the question for each candidate to answer. But I really like this question. So it said 2 candidates have represented this area. Please tell us what you've accomplished for the riding during your term. For the other candidate, please tell us what previous work you may have done for the community. So this question, in my opinion, represents the ability to lead, to represent us as Charlotte County people in Ottawa. So the question that we're writing it down to, and it's going to go Susan, Karen, John. The question is, why are you the right person to represent us in Ottawa?
Well, as you can tell, I have not represented this already. I'm hoping to again this time. The reason I would like to get involved in this is I have a fair bit of experience, not only in municipal government of Hanwell. I was also involved for many years at the local service district level, and I was on the steering committee that developed the and got the rural community started. We went from everything from the meetings to doing the vote to promoting why we needed to have a say in our government. And so I've gotten to know that area really, really well. All the people and all the concerns. And I realized that having an opportunity to be the MP would just be the same thing, really, only on a much, much larger scale. It'd give me more opportunities to, I think there are so many opportunities in New Brunswick and in Canada that we need to change our focus and be more people-oriented, more environment-oriented, and like I say, that's why I think that I would be, do very well at this, because I'm more of a dealing with I'd rather deal with you guys here than with all the large companies and whatever in Ottawa. And I would make sure whenever I was working for us that it'd be community-based and community-grown and very as close to down to earth as I can possibly get.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you. So Karen, in this election, why are you the right person to represent us in Ottawa?
Well, for the last 4 years, I can say that I've worked very hard. It's actually the only way I know how to work. And I think the hard-working part is really important because there has to be a level of commitment to the riding, to the people here. And also when we look at votes in the House of Commons, we did over 1,000 votes. So I believe, I've got great staff that have supported me, but also to do my homework when it comes to a vote. And well before that, so if legislation is coming up, I've demonstrated that I've done my homework. I've also demonstrated that I don't always vote with my party. So whether it was the vote on genocide, the definition of genocide, I was firmly convinced, even after I did all my homework on that what was taking place with ISIL was an act of genocide. I was new in the House of Commons. I voted against our government on it. 3 days later, the UN came out and said it was actually an act of genocide. So I've demonstrated that I will stand up for you in the House of Commons and vote for our riding. I've also demonstrated, I've taken leadership on some things that have been very difficult. It's not easy to vote on something that loud people will say, that's not what everyone wanted. But we look at the issue of gun control. When we look at that, what often people don't talk about, they don't talk about the women that were threatened with guns. They're not a statistic. They're not dead, they're not injured, but they're mentally harmed. I moved that legislation to part of where it is, and no, it does not include a blanket ban across the country. If I was not involved in that and representing a rural and coastal riding, it would be a very different conversation that we'd be having right now. So I think I've demonstrated hard work. I've demonstrated that I will stand up for you. I will do that again in another 4 years, and I'll work my darndest to represent you well. Thank you.
Thanks, John, with the upcoming election, why are you the right person to represent us in Ottawa?
So that's a good and important question. And when I was in the House, there were 308 members of Parliament. And you know what? I disagree with half them, but they all worked hard. Karen works hard. I'll be the first to admit that. She has to work hard. This is a big riding, and the demands on an MP don't end. They don't end on the weekends. They don't end if you're not feeling well. They don't end when you're in Ottawa. And people are up there for the best of intentions as well. But it comes down to values as well, and how the members voting in Parliament. And I think I can stand by my voting record in Parliament. It's tough to find areas where I voted in Parliament that really rankled folks back home. It's true on owner-operator, which I stood out and talked about. It's true on Bill C-30 when I opposed the Harper government publicly on a government bill. Not an opposition bill, not a motion. A government bill was put forward that would require more regulations of cell phones, and for the cell phone, the big telecom companies to maintain a collection of all their emails. This was an outrageous piece of legislation that the bureaucrats dreamt up, and 4 members of Parliament on the Conservative side spoke out against it. It made national news in Maclean's and the Globe and Mail and editorials back home as well. And the bill was killed. Prime Minister Harper understood that it was a bad bill, and it took a few members to speak out against it publicly and to do so in the lobby of the House of Commons. I've worked across party lines with opposition MPs as well, and again, I have a good record on standing up and speaking out for this community, whether it was on repealing the long gun bill, which we worked 10, 15 years to get done. That was a struggle that began when I was at the National Post, continued when I was at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and I was so pleased to cast those 3 votes in Parliament to finally end the $2 billion boondoggle of the registry. But again, this question of values, and for the Liberal candidate to say, well, we're fighting these, but you know what, why didn't the Liberal government recognize the genocide? Maybe we need a new government in Ottawa that actually represents our values here in New Brunswick, because they failed on that, and they failed on many other issues where Trudeau pulled out troops and didn't act in our interest. Thank you.
You can wrap up, Ian. Thank you. Okay, moving on to question 8. This one is going to go Karen, John, Susan. So this question has to do with the pipeline, which is an awesome question. The question is very, very simple as well. So Karen, John, Susan, starting with you, Karen, do you support construction of energy pipelines to the East Coast?
I think that pipelines are the safest way to transport oil. Certainly we can look at Lac Mégantic and what happened there with the rail. It has to follow through with an environmental process. I'm well aware, as the chair of the New Brunswick caucus, the conversations that have taken place in the early part of my tenure. I know that there's a company right now from the West that's looking at possibly a resurgence of Energy East, but I'm also aware that company or that person has not had a conversation yet with Irving Oil. I think that when we look at Irving and St. John, we have to take into serious consideration and focusing on the outcome from it. The heavy crude from the West currently cannot be refined in St. John. So we have that challenge. There's 1,000 jobs that could be created, and certainly 50 to 60 jobs that would be there long term. So when we look at that, it has to follow through on an environmental process through the former NEB, but as well, there is no application in Ottawa. If there was an application, if it went through the process and it passed, it certainly would take serious consideration. The project that I think has promise and more quickly is small modular nuclear reactors. Down the road at Point Lepreau, we've had 45 years experience with that. That's going to be decommissioned in about 20 years. Small modular nuclear reactors could be manufactured here in New Brunswick. We're talking 6,000 jobs in a large energy project, not just for a short period of time, a long period of time, and up to 13,000 jobs included for the supply chain. There is an interest. It will take political will. That's a project that I'm championing, and I know the Higgs government supports it. I know the Gallant government supports it. I've talked about it with my caucus. I've worked with Frank McKenna on that for over a year now. There's a great possibility there, and also taking that expertise and on the manufacturing side. And we could look at the oil fields in the West, and they could also be using this to help produce that oil. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. John, Do you support construction of energy pipelines to the East Coast?
Absolutely. My record in Parliament demonstrates that I work hard to get the Energy East pipeline to New Brunswick built. Here's a vote that took place in the House of Commons on February the 1st, 2016, that given this time of economic uncertainty, the House A recognizes the importance of the energy sector to the Canadian economy and supports its development in an environmentally sustainable way. B agrees that pipelines are the safest way to transport oil. C acknowledges the desire for the Energy East pipeline expressed by the provincial governments of Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, and New Brunswick. And D expresses its support for the Energy East pipeline currently under consideration. The vote on February the 2nd, 2016, I'm afraid Ms. Ludwig voted against Energy East pipeline on February the 1st, 2016. That is her record.
Thank you, John. Susan, do you support construction of energy pipelines to the East Coast?
Well, I guess probably most people can guess my answer on that one. Anyway, no, actually, and it's not because I have any. I understand the short economic value of having pipelines, but unfortunately, we're not in a position where we can look short term. We have to look more long term. The world is changing. The economy is changing. In Energy East, in particular, the problem I would have with it is we're not manufacturing the oil in the West. We're shipping it here. I do believe in the short term, obviously, the economy is not going to change. Oil and gas are going to be around for a short time as they're phased out, as things progress, and hopefully more environmentally friendly means of energy will come online. We need to promote those and spend money on that sort of thing rather than spending billions and billions of dollars building something with a very short term, not short term as in 10 years, but in the grand scheme of things that we'll be phasing out anyway. The economy can't keep going in the same path that we have. We need renewable energy, and to me, it's a waste of money to spend a lot of money for a very short-term game and then along with everything else that comes with them. So no, I would not support pipelines.
Thank you, Susan. This next question affects many people in our county a great deal, so I'll look forward to hear your answers. We're going to go John, Susan, Karen on this one, and the question involves around affordable housing. So, starting with you, John, what is your position on affordable housing?
It's a good question, and the question of affordability is something we're hearing not only right across the riding of New Brunswick Southwest, but we're hearing it right across the country, where people find they're working harder than ever before and they're struggling to make ends meet, or if they do pay the bills at the end of the month, they just don't have anything left over afterwards. And so our party has looked at this question, and we're coming up with ideas, both in the broader question of affordability. How do we make life a little bit easier for Canadians, small businesses, people on fixed income, working families? Part of the solution is to lower taxes. Part of the solution is to increase some of the tax credits that are available to seniors, to offer tax-free maternity leave, as well to repeal the carbon tax. And on the specific issue of home ownership, which is becoming ever more expensive for young families, we're proposing longer mortgages so the monthly payments are lower and more sustainable and more affordable for families. Because at the end of the day, if Ottawa is taking ever more in taxes from families across this riding, across this country, it's that much harder to pay for a mortgage, to pay for a home, and to get into home ownership. So we think the government has a lot to do, because increasingly now, under the Trudeau government, the biggest single cost is now taxes. All the taxes to all three levels of government amounts to more than what we pay on food or housing or the other necessities of life. So our government's just taking too much, and we need to get those taxes down, including the carbon tax, which is a tax on everything, to try to make life more affordable for Canadians.
Thank you, John. Susan, what is your position on affordable housing?
Well, actually, my thought on affordable housing comes basically, it's a two-pronged problem. One is affordable housing in general. The other is affordable housing for seniors, and just housing for seniors in general. Actually, my sort of area of expertise is in Hanwell, is a very good example of seniors housing. Basically, there is none. Because we're so close to Fredericton, it has turned into, you know, a suburban type thing. We have, and when everyone is on big lots, we have no multi-unit housing. I think not only for seniors, but for everyone in the low income, I think there's an advantage of having a lot, like you say, taxes are wonderful, great idea to have lower taxes, it doesn't hurt anyone. But I think there needs to be more publicly funded, well-organized seniors housing, public housing, because the people need to have the support of the community and of the people around them. And so it is, and also in this rural areas, especially as in Hanwell, for example, people are moving out of Hanwell left and as they get to be, you know, becoming 50, 60 years old because they're wanting to downsize and there's just nowhere to go. And so whether they're moving to cheaper housing or there just needs to be more rural housing in general, more multi-unit housing, more opportunities for people to stay in the area that they come from and stay in the area that they want to be in and have a reasonably priced home.
Thank you, Susan. Karen, what is your position on affordable housing?
Affordable housing is absolutely essential. It's essential for growing our communities, for keeping young people home and making that transition at some point to maybe purchase a home. But when we look at affordable housing, I can look no closer than Blacks Harbor. I remember when we did the announcement there regarding infrastructure, I asked Terry James, the mayor, could you tell me what this infrastructure announcement means to you? And it's one of those, you know, a big word that people, they don't even get what infrastructure is. And I understand that because they don't see it. And what Terry said to me was, or she said to the group, this means with this aeration system, we can actually now build some homes. So when we look at affordable housing, it's a planning, it involves planning. It involves municipalities, it involves the provincial government, and it involves the federal government. We transferred roughly, we put aside about $7 billion for affordable housing. Those areas get prioritized. And I can tell you that whether it's any kind of announcement that we do, it didn't typically start with the federal government. It started with a municipality determining what the priority was, and for many, it is affordable housing. Susan mentioned about seniors, absolutely critical. Seniors have affordable housing, but we also need to have affordable housing for new immigrants. It's a real challenge in communities like this. They're small, they're beautiful places to live, people love it, but they need to have affordable housing and quality housing. So when we look at building these units, and it's local, we could have private investors come in, we also have to look at greater efficiencies as well, energy efficiency. And I think that, you know, when we're looking at as a government in terms of environmentalism and working with the economy, that's where you do really see the environment and the economy connected together. When we strengthen the environment or we put the environment as a priority, there are economic spin-offs from that. And certainly a high efficiency, affordable housing planning system would be absolutely invaluable to many of our small, rural, and coastal communities.
Thank you, Karen. Question 10 pertains with tax benefits. This will go Susan, Karen, John. So the question that was written is, what is your stance on UCB, being Universal Child Benefit, child tax credits, etc.? What is your stance, Susan?
Oh, well, of course, anything that puts money in the pockets of parents is never going to be a bad thing. I'm pretty sure that they wouldn't, I mean, yes, no, I think that they're a vitally important part of every social program. I think that not only should we have the UCB, I mean, we need to look at all the different areas of the population, and you know, there should be the same thing for seniors. There should be the same thing for, you know, grants for every group that are really needing to have assistance.
Thank you, Susan. Karen, what is your stance on UCB, child tax credits, etc.?
I was actually opposed to the UCB. It was under the Conservative plan because it gave money to millionaires. Our plan is the Canada Child Benefit. And in our federal riding, there's almost 12,000 children that have been raised out of poverty with that. There's a maximum of $5,500, and it's also tax-free. It's not taxed. And when we look at the tax credits, I hear over and over again, sometimes about the $100 tax credit for the sports credit. Have you tried to put your child into sports? $100 does not go very far. If you look at the Canada Child Benefit, what that offers to a family, they get to make their own choices of where they'd like to have their money invested for their child. Maybe it's music lessons, maybe it's golf that it's not included. It was not included under the tax credit under the Conservatives. It is about choices, and I think in terms of tax credits, those are choices that then government makes sets the priority. We're putting more money into families and those that need it the most. That's absolutely critical. They get to make their own decision. They're the parents. And that's my position on it. I fully support the Canada Child Benefit, which is tax-free, and it goes into the hands of those that need it the most. Thank you.
Thank you. John, what is your stance on UCB, child tax credits, etc.?
Yeah, I think the Liberals built very well on the system that the Conservatives put in place. Remember the election when we were first offering the $100 a month, $1,200 a year for parents with young children, and the Liberals said, oh, they'll just waste that on beer and popcorn. Well, we won that argument, and 10 years later, the Liberals took our plan and added to it and made it more generous, and that's a good thing, because it means money's going directly to parents. It's not going to bureaucrats. It's not going to so-called expert child daycare workers. It's going to parents, and they can decide how to spend it. It's a good system. We want to retain that, but now we want to build on it. We want to bring in as well to help families the universal tax cut that will put more money in the pockets of families. We want to bring back, or we want to increase the tax credit for seniors to put more money in their pocket. We want to bring back the money for the fitness tax credit as well, because parents do talk about those. It's nice when you put kids in hockey or a program and you get a little tax break for doing the right thing. So we support the allowance to parents for kids and want to build on it, because we recognize the family is the cornerstone of society, and the more we can do to help families and the more we can leave money in the pockets of Canadians, the better off our communities are going to be and our country's going to be. So I think we've worked well on this, and we're going to keep working on it to bring taxes down.
John? The next question pertains to supporting our veterans. So I'm going to read the full question and then surmise it in the end for the candidates. Veterans have served our country and deserve appreciation and appropriate support from our federal government. We have seen veteran facilities closed by past governments, as well as to be reopened then again. So the question surmises, starting with Karen, then John, then Susan, shall be, what is your position on supporting our veterans?
Thank you. I'm the daughter of a veteran and a sister of a veteran. There's nothing more close to my heart than veterans. And we look at the 9 veteran centers that was closed. That was wrong. We reopened those at veteran centers. 1,000 people lost their jobs over that. We now have about 700 back into place. That's really, really important to me. I was also a member of the Standing Committee for Veterans Affairs. I heard many requests from veterans. I also heard from experts. And we look at veterans, we've invested $10 billion of new money. But it's not only for veterans, it's also for their families. So when a veteran serves, their family serves. And when we look at educational programs, training benefits, the transition from military life to civilian life is a really critical time, and that's something that we can always improve on. And I look at veterans, they've served our country. I'm sitting up here as a former female member of Parliament because of what our veterans fought for. So I dearly, dearly believe in that. I think we always need to strive to do more. Our veterans served us, and we need to serve them. Thank you.
John, what is your position on supporting our veterans?
Well, like most Canadians, nothing but respect and reverence for the men and women that have worn the uniform to defend our Canadian values, whether it's at home or overseas. Many of you know my wife Kelly is a commander in the Royal Canadian in the Royal Canadian Navy, so I have a good understanding. I think when I was in the House of Commons, I was the only member there actually married to someone in Canada's armed forces. So I understand the sacrifice. I understand what it means to live away from a spouse. I'm looking at you, Tom. You make a big deal about where I live.
Is this allowed, actually?
I'm looking at you, Tom. That is correct. So I'm pointing out someone. My wife serves overseas, and she serves outside of St. Andrews, and she does so honorably and proudly, and for that I respect her. But you know, again, we're all going to agree on the importance of veterans. But again, Mr. Trudeau told a veteran who asked about benefits, as the Trudeau government continues to fight them in court, they're asking too much. So again, look at the leadership at the top and how the government of Canada is treating our veterans today. The talk does not match the watch here, folks, and we need to change the government so we can treat our veterans with the respect they deserve once again. Thank you.
My apologies for that. That won't happen again. So no more mentioning of anybody in the crowd, please, for the further questions. My apologies to that. Okay, so Susan, you get your crack at what is your position on supporting our veterans?
Well, actually, I think it's our second question of the night that we all agree with 100%. I too have family who have been veterans, and I have friends who have been veterans, and I do believe that we have really treated them kind of shabbily, I think, over the last few years. I realize that budgets are tight and money is hard to come by, but this is the one area, because I do tend to be a little fiscally responsible sometimes, this is the one area where I think we have to put our priorities. These people have done a lot. They've sacrificed a lot for us to even be here. And I'm not even just talking about the older people. I know people who are in their 30s and 40s who've been through so much. And they need to have a long-term confidence that the government is going to be there for them. We need to make things as least complicated as possible, as easy and as caring as possible. We need to have, especially on addictions and mental health services, you need to do as much as you possibly can. And I hate to say it, but even if it costs a little bit more money, just make it as easy and as painless as you can for these people, because they have done all they can for us.
Thank you. The next question that we're going to move on to is Medicare, something that we've all read many, many times, and so it'll be nice to hear exactly what your take is on this. So we're going to be going John, Susan, Karen on this question. So it's not a long one, so I'm going to read the entire thing. Many people in our riding need life-saving medication, but simply cannot afford it. Starting with you, John, what will you do to help these specific people?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's one that I'm sure all the candidates have seen and heard people talk about, the rising cost of medicine and the struggle to buy medicine when it's needed, and the challenges when it comes to paying for medicine versus decisions like paying the power bill, or even putting food on the table. And no Canadian should have to make that choice. And this is where I think governments do need to step up. And like Susan was saying, we have to start with those that need it the most, and over time build on that, because it's just not right. I'm sure we all know people in our communities that have faced these tough questions, and it's not a question you want to face lightly, because the result really can be a matter of life and death. So this is something I'm going to continue to advocate for, that we do more to help people, particularly at the low end of the income ladder, to get them the help they need. For those that have Blue Cross and coverage, life's all right. But for those that don't have that job or don't have that coverage and don't have provincial coverage, it can be tough. And that's something that I think as a country we need to do better on. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Susan, what are you going to do to help the people in our riding who need life-saving medication but simply cannot afford it?
Well, actually, if anyone has had a chance to look at the Green Party platform, that is one of the things that we're very adamant on, is having a full pharmacare program and a dental program for people of lower incomes. Plus, on a personal note, I would like to see the systems between a universal system. If you live in Canada, you should be able to get treatment anywhere else in Canada that you live. And just as an example, I happened to be at an event this spring, and there was a lady from Manitoba here, and she fell and had an accident and hit her head, and we called the ambulance came, and in the end, she did not go in the ambulance because she's from Manitoba, her healthcare was not going to cover it, and she was going to have to pay a fee to go in the ambulance to Fredericton. And she decided that the ambulance people actually took her, put her in her car, and her friends drove her into Fredericton. And I think that's totally unreasonable. I think if you're a Canadian, wherever you live, you should have the same care and the same level of care at the same price.
Here, here.
Thank you, Susan. Karen, what will you do to help the people in our riding who cannot afford life-saving medication?
A key pillar to our campaign promise is national pharmacare. And one of the aspects to that we hear often is people that suffer from rare diseases. So it's looking at the formulary regarding rare diseases, because right now people are making some pretty serious decisions. I met a woman on Grand Manan 2 Saturdays ago. Her prescriptions are around $250. She has to make a decision on which one she takes. So certainly for her, she has a rare disease, a national pharmacare program is absolutely critical. I also think, when we look at national pharmacare, we also have to look at health promotion and disease prevention. So we can always do better there, but to do that, we have to have, again, a strong relationship with the provincial governments. Because when we look at Medicare itself, Medicare is not federal. Medicare is a provincial responsibility. So that's looking at what are the priorities in different areas, but certainly a national pharmacare program, I think, is number one. I've not met anyone that does not support that. And certainly we'd have to be working closely with our provincial governments to also buy into that. The other one I would say, this is from a personal note, would be our daughter is studying her master's to be a nurse practitioner. And I think it's really, really important when we look at nurse practitioners in Canada, they would be an excellent resource and they could take on greater responsibility. Being able to prescribe at the community level is absolutely critical. Maybe they could some people work in pharmacies, in terms of nurse practitioners, but it's how to not only get the medication covered, it's also getting the medication to the individuals. And we look at small businesses in Canada, or small businesses in Atlantic Canada, 54% of small businesses here are 1 to 4 employees. So most small employers are not offering, Blue Cross or any kind of prescription program. They're just trying to make payroll. So national pharmacare becomes absolutely critical for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. We only have time for a few more questions, and I've tried to get through as many as I possibly could. There were so many great ones, but we're going to be about another 2 or 3 questions more, and then we're going to get into our 3-minute closing. So we have a couple more hard-hitting ones that we want to know your take on it, and that one of them being something that affects this region, and I'm sure many others in the country, but definitely affects many areas in Charlotte County, and it pertains to with job growth. So the question is, what is your position in developing small business in rural areas with things such as, the example being high-speed internet and the changing climate of business? So we're going to be going Susan, Karen, John, pertaining to jobs growth, particularly to the rural area, using the example of high-speed internet and its importance. So what is your position in developing and supporting small business in rural areas, especially things such as high-speed internet?
Well, actually, you've hit on a really good one for me, actually, at this point in time. I live at Yoho Lake. So you can imagine what my high-speed internet is not like. No, it seems to be the infrastructure we have in the rural areas. In particular, my internet used to be better than it is now. The reason for it is, of course, the area is growing. More people are staying there year-round. The copper wire, Lord knows we don't have fiber op. So we are at a capacity where that we just can't maintain the service. And if you want to grow business in small areas, or even if you want to have people live in small areas, especially people with children who like to play games that take a lot more bandwidth than I've ever got, it's critical that the government invest, because I mean, in a lot of the places exactly where I live, there's not enough people there who are going to, it's not going to be profitable. So you need to have, if you want to have growth and you want to have companies come to these places, you have to ensure a stable, low-cost system for high-speed internet to be competitive with the rest of the world. And it's an easy, to me, it's an easy way to do that. It's not as expensive as building roads or building buildings or building infrastructure. There's lots of businesses that would love to come to a place like this and have the capacity to have their business here and bring their families here who would love to live in a place like this, who wouldn't. And it's all very, this critical infrastructure is so important for these kind of areas that it's got to become a priority, in my opinion.
Thank you, Susan.
You're welcome.
Karen, what is your position in developing and supporting small business in rural areas, especially things around high-speed internet?
Well, we are small business owners, and I can tell you on the infrastructure side, when we first got formed government, there was about $500 million set aside specifically for Connect to Innovate. I can tell you that $500 million to me is a lot of money. And so I thought this is going to be great. We're going to be completely wired in our riding. Then there were the priorities. So it was the remote communities, the First Nations communities. As much as when we talk about infrastructure, connectivity is really expensive. And we also need to have private sector, so the companies that are making us a priority. We have not been a priority in New Brunswick. Our population is small, we're spread out. We do see the fiber optic line now going to Grand Manan, but it's also beyond small business. So when we look at online education, we have young people and people, throughout their lifespan, they're not getting access to full online education. We're looking at small business. Yeah, we hear about small businesses that want to set up. So I think the connectivity is absolutely critical, but not just, just having it. It needs to be high speed, fast speed. It needs to be here sooner than later. It has to be a priority for who's ever forming government, but especially in the rural areas. And we often feel that we're the last ones to get anything. I can tell you that I sat on this. I didn't sit on the issue, but I have felt on this one in particular, when it comes to rural areas, there's so much more that we need to do. And for any one of us that's up here, it's yelling it from the rafters. But in terms of our government moving forward, when we look at a place like Charlotte County in particular, it is the priority, whether it's the cost of internet, the cost of cell phone coverage. We are looking at reducing that up to 25% and working very, very closely with the private sector. Our small businesses can stay in these communities, but they not only just to maintain themselves, they can thrive and attract new people. Thank you.
John, what is your position in developing and supporting small business in rural areas, especially with things like high-speed internet?
Yeah, as Karen said, the high-speed internet is a file that is just tremendously important to rural MPs right across the country. So this land is so vast, it's so large, and of course, unfortunately, it's the urban centers that receive the lion's share of the attention from the big telecom companies. So it's a constant push to ensure that more is put down and the speeds are there. Because in today's world, whether you're a small business or a family or a senior getting online for the first time, if you're not fully connected, you're not fully engaged with what's happening out there. Fewer and fewer newspapers, for example, are being printed today. If you want news, you get it online. Movies, online. Buying something around the world, or even from the city just a few hours away, online. If you can't do any of that, you're kind of left out, and that has an impact on communities. People leave, or they don't arrive at all. So it is important. But I think as well, because we're on the East Coast, we're away from central Canada, the growth of small business is is about many things. We almost have to work twice as hard as a similar company in central Canada, where the market is right there, the government is right there, there's assistance around every corner, it seems. Out here, we're just further. That's why it is important who represents us and what the provincial government does as well. But it also matters the broad government policies as well. And sometimes I feel like the Liberal government's giving up on rural Canada. Take the carbon tax. If you have a business in rural Canada, chances are you're going to have to transport your goods further, which means higher gas prices, higher diesel prices. And take Flakeboard over in St. Stephen, the 75 job losses. The company said it was because of one of several reasons, but higher energy prices. And today's rising NB power, NB, and as well as electricity, and take NB power rates going up, the highest level in 10 years. Same time the carbon tax came in as well.
Okay, thank you.
Except on that, both the mayor and the premier said it was due to...
We're done. We can wrap that stuff up in your last 3 minutes. So, they're down to our last question, and there were like 5 more phenomenal ones I wanted to ask. I wish we had not run out of time, but I really want them to have that last 3 minutes to wrap up on anything that's really important that they wish that I had have asked, or that they wish that they could have gone further on. They've got their full 3 minutes on that one. So I'm going to ask my last question. If your question wasn't asked, it's not that it wasn't good, it's just that we've just gone through 14 different topics and they were phenomenal. So we're going to end with something that is on every feed of social media, in all the newspapers, on the news constantly, and that is the topic of climate crisis. So we want to know the people that put their name on our ridings list to represent us. We want your personal take on this. So the question is, what are your immediate plans to address the climate crisis? It's going to go Karen, John, Susan to wrap it up. Karen, you're first.
The environment is definitely top of mind for Canadians from coast to coast to coast. Climate change is something that we cannot be denying. Climate change is real, and climate change is something that we can adapt around. If we look at St. John, we can look at the St. John River and the flooding that's happened there. We've had 2 record floods 2 years in a row. So when we look at infrastructure, part of that is continuing to invest in our infrastructure, working with our provincial government and municipal governments, but working with climate change in mind. Had we done that for the past 20 years, so I'm not pointing at any particular government, I'm just saying, had we done that for the last 20 years, we would not likely be in the situation we are today. We'd be more adaptable with our economy, but also with the physical environment around us, to be able to mitigate some of the risks that are out there.
Thank you, Karen. Oh, sorry. No, that wasn't. Sorry, I thought you were wrapping up. Sorry. Carry on. Don't penalize her for that. Go.
When we look at our young people, I think our young people are absolutely critical in this. So the young lady that's sitting in the front, I know for young people, I'm listening. Climate change is very real. And it's the number one thing that I hear from young people today. Your voice really matters. You're the people that look outside the box because you never knew that there was a box. And I think when we look at climate change, that's an important element, not only for today, it's our future, it's part of our economy, and we definitely should be looking at our environment and our economy as one, and trying to find some ways to build our future, because that is what our future is about. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I'm sorry about that. So, John, what are your immediate plans to address the climate crisis?
Yeah, a good question. I think that the challenge we face is one that's going to be solved through technology, made in Canada ingenuity, and adaptation. For example, instead of hurting businesses with a carbon tax, let's export Canadian technology and know-how. We have a clean environment. Overseas in developing countries, they do not. Instead of pushing companies outside of Canada because our taxes are too high, so they set up shop elsewhere, let's encourage them to send the technology they have overseas so it can be used to clean environments around the world. Because the carbon tax isn't just about us in this room that are paying it. Without having transit or choices to offset it, it's why the Liberal government exempted the big emitters. Irving Oil pays 90% less of a carbon tax than what you pay. They pay 10 cents on the dollar. And so do other big emitters right across this country. Well, that's just not right. Big companies should be part of the solution. They should not be exempt. And why is it we have a Prime Minister who tells us and forces us to pay more when we're already meeting our emission targets in New Brunswick? Why is a carbon tax necessary here when we're meeting our emission targets? We don't need a carbon tax, yet it's been forced on us while the Prime Minister thinks nothing of jet setting across the country so we can go surfing in British Columbia on a government jet. Or he flies to Florida and comes home 3 times and then goes down again. I know the Prime Minister's residence in Ottawa. There are several. They're beautiful. And they're great spots to just get away. He does not need to be traveling like this if he's telling us we have to do more. Leadership starts at the top. And under this Prime Minister, it hasn't started at the top. It starts with us and our pocketbook, while people that are well connected to the Liberal Party are exempt. And that's not right. And that's why we'll repeal the carbon tax.
Susan, the last question to you being, what are your immediate plans to address the climate crisis?
Well, I guess my thought is we are where we are. I see no point in wasting time figuring out how we got to where we are. We are. Actually, I had an interesting experience last fall. I had the opportunity, as I was running in the provincial election, to meet David Suzuki for the first time. And it was one of those situations where just all of a sudden you realized there was just he and I in the room. And he looked at me, and it was very late at night, and he was very tired. And he goes, you know, he said, I'm 82, I think it was. And he said, the only thing that really bothers me is that everything that I have predicted all my life is coming true. And he goes, I'm an old man, but I'm really, really worried about my grandchildren. And no one is really getting it. And this was the reason I ran for the Green Party, is I do believe that the Green Party gets it. We are where we are through no ill will done by anyone. But we need to change our course and not argue back and forth about individual things. We need to have a long-term plan. We need to look forward, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and how to reduce our emissions, whether we meet our targets or whether we, now or not. We're not going to argue about that. But we need to look at the opportunities, not the short-term bickering back and forth. There are opportunities in solar, there are opportunities in wind power, there's opportunities in geothermal. And I believe in every opportunity should be looked at with the environment in mind. If someone comes to me with a totally off-the-wall idea, as long as it's viable and as long as it is progressive and helpful, I would certainly consider looking at everything. But we need to not only we need to get the community involved. We need, as Karen was saying, I've been invited a couple times, actually I'm going next week, I think, to St. Stephen, to the schools. And I ran into a teacher from St. Stephen here at the Charlotte County Fall Fair, and she was telling me about the programs that they've got going, and I was totally astounded, because I thought, my gosh, these kids are way, way ahead of me, and and everybody keeps saying that the kids are, oh, shoot. I finally got 5 minutes in.
So many more questions to ask, but only so much time. We had to set a time limit to this. We just went through 14, and they weren't the easiest questions on the spot. They were not given, we didn't give them to the candidates beforehand. These came from the floor, these came from the chamber, and on the spot, they gave us answers from their heart, answers from their minds, things in which they believe. So we covered 14 different topics. Some of them intertwined, of course, but minority government, gun control, health care, marine health, taxes, immigration, ability to lead, pipeline, housing, tax benefits, veterans, Medicare, job growth, and climate crisis. You covered a ton of topics in a short amount of time, and thank you very much for respecting the timelines on that. So you now each have 3 minutes to wrap up. This closing represents your opportunity to tell us something that we didn't maybe ask that you wish that we had of. This is your chance to wrap up on a question that you get cut off early on. So take your 3 minutes as you wish. As we started on John's end of the table and down to Karen's, this time we go backwards the same way. So Karen, you go first. You have your full 3 minutes to tell us what message you want to do to wrap this evening up. Carry on.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening tonight. I appreciate that we've had a number of questions here. I think we've almost solved the problems of Canada. But what I would like to share with you is who I am. I mean, I have worked hard the last 4 years for everyone in this riding. And when I look at the next 4 years, I would like that opportunity. But I want to say first and foremost, I didn't run with re-election as my focus. I really ran about making a difference. And I believe that the impact that I've had working with all of you and other people in the riding, that I have made a difference. I look at the energy projects. Yeah, I mean, we do need some big boom here. And I think in the short term, it's likely to be the small modular nuclear reactors. As Susan mentioned, there's wind, there's solar, there's nuclear. There are lots of opportunities that we should be seizing on as an area. I do want to go back and just talk as a closing, because I know it's a stickler for many people here. As John calls it, the carbon tax, I would call it a price on pollution. Polluting is not free. The top 10 emitters in this province, they're not exempt. They should not be exempt. They should be paying their fair share. They have not even started paying yet, folks. The Flake Board did not close because of a price on pollution, because I know I got them a better deal last fall working directly with David Moffat. They closed because of a market issue. When we look at climate change, it should be our #1 issue. That isn't about a 4-year term or an 8-year term. That is about our future. And that is a big part of where I'm looking at in the next 4 years. When we look at extreme weather events, we can't stop them, but we could definitely adapt to them. We also need to know, when we look at the provincial government, it's not easy to fight the issue with climate change when we don't have provincial governments rowing in the same boat with us. If a provincial government wants to sue the federal government in court, I can tell you it makes for very damning relations within the family. And that's not to the benefit of anyone here. The price of gas today is cheaper than the price of gas under Stephen Harper. Every cent that's collected on a price and the provincial government had the first option. We're the only province in Atlantic Canada that does not have a Made in New Brunswick plan. The only province. You don't hear about Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, or PEI. They're fine with their plans. It's working for them. So we had that option. We didn't, for some reason, the provincial government, their plans didn't pass. So what I'm looking forward to is a provincial government that does not want to fight pollution in court, but wants to develop solutions. And that's what my focus is the next 4 years. It's working with every level of government, finding solutions that work for us, and stop with the misinformation and the misguidance of Canadians. It's not fair, it's not right, and as an educator, I would never teach my class like that. Thank you.
So you're next in line, because when we opened, we went down this way. This time we're going backwards the same way. So Susan, you now have 3 minutes to do the exact same thing.
Actually, the one thing I'd like to start off is I would like to finish my only answer that got to be 5 minutes long. I know that people when people want to prolong things, they go, oh, the children of the future, and they'll be the ones who will change us, and then things will change. And really and truly, as Karen says, they are the ones who have no history. They think outside the box, and they really will probably be the ones who really will benefit from the change. But the problem is we are the ones who are in power now. We're the ones who make the decisions. We're the ones who can take their ideas and take our own ideas and stop bickering back and forth. Really and truly, the main reason I got into, when I was asked to run for the Green Party, it was because they had said I had worked, for my community, and I was interested in the community. I knew all these people, and I was interested in working for them. And really and truly, we need to I've lived in New Brunswick my whole life, actually. I've lived near the Bay of Fundy. I'm from Hillsborough originally. And for my whole entire life, I've seen the pattern of these guys are in for 4 years, these guys come in for 4 years, these guys might stay for 8 years, and then they don't. And then I find that most elections seem to go not with looking forward and looking at the issues and seeing which is the best path for us to take. It's like, we have to get rid of these guys, and then 4 years later we gotta get rid of these guys. And really and truly, I'm probably old enough that you don't need to get rid of me after 4 or 5.
You'll be done.
I'd be done, say 2 terms, I'm good. I'm not going to be at this for 30 years. But I really feel it's time to think outside the box, to do something different, to look at what is going to be best for us now. I realize that, yes, in short term, we can't change the climate tomorrow. Wish we could. But we do have to plan for mitigation. But we do have to have a long-term plan, because if we don't, there will be no tomorrow eventually. We probably won't be here at the time, but we don't want to leave that legacy to anyone else. We need to move forward. We need to have strong long-term plans. We need to have an agreement with everyone. And the thing is, I find that the people who are in government, I know Karen a little bit, not very well. I know John a little bit less, although we've met a few times. And I know that they've both worked really, really hard. And they've done that. And Karen, I'd like to thank you for helping us with our grant for the seniors in Veracruz. And I mean, her and her staff have come with us, and they've been very helpful, and they understand. And I really appreciate all these people, but I'm running against them just because we need a different path. We need to get away from the traditional parties. We need to have a little more forward thinking. We need to be not necessarily kinder and gentler. You've not seen me in a certain mood. Where I could not be so kind and gentle. But anyway, we need to look at things differently. We need to think outside the box. We need to look at different people.
That's why I love the closing. I didn't know Susan was funny. This is great. John, you've got 3 minutes to close.
Thank you. Well, Susan, I'll meet you halfway, and I'll agree that change is necessary. I think I just can't go as far as cast a vote for the Green.
Oh, John, you can't.
Look, 4 years ago, a lot of voters tried change, and what I hear at the doors is a lot of people are not happy with that change. We had great promises, but the results didn't materialize. Whether it's voting reform, for those that believed this was going to be 2015 would be the last election under the current first past the post system, so much for that. We'd have 2 or 3 years of small deficits, so much for that. Or the gun registry wouldn't come back, so much for that. With C-71, the backdoor long gun registry. And a couple points. There's just no, we want change, but we want common sense. And to listen to our Liberal candidate kind of ready to fight the Blaine Higgs government, when Mr. Higgs is offering good common sense government, I think. New Brunswick is already meeting its CO2 reduction targets under the Paris Accord. That is a fact. Yet the Trudeau government insists we have a carbon tax on families and businesses. The plan that the Higgs government came up with has been on the desk of the Environment Minister for 6 months.
No, it hasn't.
They are not. Talk to Environment Minister Jeff Carr. It's been up there, and they're not moving on it. And Karen's right. She got a better deal for Flakeboard, because it's a large emitter, and their carbon tax is 10% of what you and I pay. But even at that 10%, it was still too much for them. If the Liberals are re-elected on October 21st, the carbon tax goes up April the 1st, 2020, 2021, 2022. Gas will go up by 13 cents a litre. It's going to keep going up and up. Look at gas prices in British Columbia. Highest carbon tax in the country, highest gas prices in the continent. Of course, it's markets. Markets cause Flakeboard to close. Markets cause Energy East to be abandoned, when in fact we know it was the Trudeau Liberals that killed Energy East with their added regulations. And unfortunately, not one Liberal New Brunswick member of Parliament stood up in Parliament, not at home in an editorial paper or home in a community hall, in Parliament where it matters, not one stood up and said, we need this project for New Brunswick and we need this project for Canada, because they don't want to push back against Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Same thing on C-71. I hate to say it, but Ms. Ludwig said one thing at home, that she would oppose the bill, and got to Parliament and voted for it. Same thing on the ECOA minister. We needed a ECOA minister here. But in Parliament, they voted in the House of Commons not to have the ECOA minister from Atlantic Canada. And of course, we have a carbon tax that not only did Trudeau push, but also all Liberal members of Parliament. So we've tried change and it hasn't worked. So I hope on October 21st, you'll consider change again and cast your vote for me. Thank you.
On behalf of the Eastern Charlotte Chamber of Commerce, thank you, candidates. You guys did a great job, because I've done an awful lot of these debates over the years, and I've done them with two of you at least. You guys were very well behaved. I will give you that one. So on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce, would you please get involved in your chamber, attend their events, and be sure to support. So on behalf of the Chamber, this evening is done. I hereby close the event. Thank you very much. Thank you.